Thank you for joining me here today for part 2 of building Windows Phone applications with Silverlight. My name is Peter Torr. I'm a program manager on the Windows Phone application platform team. And when I was preparing this presentation back in Redmond, I had this great idea for an intro to kind of warm up the crowd. I was going to come here, do some yo-yo tricks, really impress you all. But I think I've been overdone by Sterling the other day. He was brilliant at his yo-yo tricks. So I'm going to pass on that, and I'm going to go straight into the slides. So first of all, a couple of points, fine print. This is not Silverlight 101. Some of you may have been here for Sean Oster's talk earlier today. If not, no worries. There's plenty of resources for you online, in books, etc. Or you could even watch Sean's talk on demand later on if you missed it. On the other end of the spectrum, if you'd like more deep architectural information, Istvan Cezeri is doing a talk tomorrow morning, and I highly encourage you to go to that if you want even more in-depth information. So what are the key things that I would like to kind of get across to you and for you to take out of this presentation? There are really 3 of them, because we love things to come in 3s. Firstly is that applications on the phone are built using pages. You've probably seen this in some of the keynote demos, in some of the other demos that have been done, is that we have this page-based navigational model in Windows Phone, and I'll show you about that. I'll show you that. The next one is that our UI is very clean and simple, and you've also seen this in the keynote, and if you went to the design talk yesterday, they would have talked about that. And so we have a very clean and simple UI. And finally, the third thing I'm going to talk about is how you can use services that we provide to really enhance your user experience. And this, sorry, technical issue, this is auto-forwarding. If anyone has one of these, please don't use it. This is auto-forwarding on me. So Mike in here was talking about part 1. He talked about input and output and so on. What I'm going to be talking about is these 3 things, the 3 key takeaways: application structure, controls and theming, and connected services. So let's start right off with application structure. And first of all, I want to just go with a little bit of history. Any one of you who's done Silverlight before kind of knows this diagram. A Silverlight application consists of a root visual, which is a user control. Typically, that user control contains content. And this is a great way of building applications on the web, of building widgets, of building rich media applications on the web. But the trouble with this is as you start to add more and more content, it appears to the user more and more like a web page, and they want to navigate it the same way they navigate web pages. But that doesn't work so well, because when they try and use the back button in the browser, the page gets torn down, your app gets torn down, and they're not very happy. Now, in Silverlight 3, they recognized this was a problem, and they solved it. They introduced the notion of a frame control, and a frame navigates between pages. And now, just like a normal web browser application, you have multiple pages in your application, and they work well with the browser button. So the user hits back, they see the previous page in your application, not the Bing search results page. So what did we do for Windows Phone? Well, we really liked the navigation system from Silverlight 3, but we realized there's really no reason for that user control in the middle. So our structure for a Windows Phone application is really simple. We have an application, it has a frame as its visual root, and inside that frame, we navigate between different pages. And you've all seen there's a hardware key on our phones. When the user hits the phone, they're very happy, because the app does exactly what they expect. So with that very brief introduction, I'm going to jump into some code here in Visual Studio, and I'm going to show you not just the basic page navigation that you would have seen if you knew Silverlight, but also some of the things that we've added in the phone to deal with orientation and application bar and so on. And quickly, raise your hand. How many people are familiar with the Silverlight 3 navigation system? Okay, it's probably about half of you. So some of this will be old hat to you. Everybody else, this will be new for you. So let's switch over here to the laptop. And very brief tour. Here I am in app.xaml. And as I mentioned, we have an application, and its root visual is set to be a phone application frame. And this is a class that's specific to the phone. It derives from the Silverlight 3 frame. So everything you know and love about the Silverlight 3 frame, you get in the phone application frame. And by default, we're setting it to go to our main page.xaml. So let's take a look at main page.xaml. In my sample application here, I have two pages, main page and details page. So if I look at main page.xaml, here it is in the designer. I have a couple of links here. And as anyone who's ever even written a web page before knows, the way you get from one page to another is through a hyperlink. So this is old hat for those of you who've done Silverlight 3 navigation before. But even if you haven't, if you know how to write a hyperlink in the web, in HTML, you know how to switch between pages in Silverlight. So this first link, which just says go to details page, is just going to navigate me, it's going to navigate me to detailspage.xaml. So when I click on this link, the phone's going to navigate to this page. But sometimes when you navigate between pages, you want to pass data. And again, anyone who's done Silverlight navigation, or even anyone who's done normal web navigation, knows that the way that you pass data between pages is with a query string. And it's no different here. If I want to go to details page and I want to pass in some data, I just use my good old question mark name equals value pair. And now I can pass data from this page to the next page. So let's take a look at that next page. Here it is. It's called details page, very stylishly designed page. And I have two things on this page. I have a text block, which has the name message, and the text query string goes here. I guess you know what comes next. And I have a button here that when I click it, it's going to go back. And so let's look at the code behind this. It's very, very simple. Hit F7. I have my normal constructor, calls initialize component. I have an onNavigated2 method. Now, when you're dealing with page-based systems like Silverlight 3 navigation or with the Windows Phone applications, typically you don't use the loaded handler. If you're used to normal Silverlight apps, you write code inside the loaded handler. Well, for navigation, your control or your page gets loaded once, and then as you navigate to and from that page, you get this called again on onNavigated2, and there's onNavigated_from, onNavigated2, onNavigated_from. And so you don't really use the loaded event, you use the Navigated2 override instead. And so here, I'm going to call the base, and then I'm going to declare a message variable, a string variable, and I'm going to look at the navigation context, which is what I got from the previous page. I'm going to look inside the query string, just as you would on the web, and I'm going to try and get the value called message. And if that call succeeds, I'm going to set the message text to be that message, and it'll appear on the screen. And then my event handler for the back button is just going to call navigationservice.goback. Again, exactly the same way you would do it for a Silverlight 3 navigation application. So let's just go ahead and run this just to see how it works. Switch over to the device. Switch over to the device. I'm afraid I cannot get the device to work. If there's anyone can please come and try and make the projector work, that would be great. For the time being, I'll use the emulator instead. No worries, we have this awesome emulator. I'm going to switch to the emulator, hit Control F5. And now here we see the application. Excuse me. And if I hit Go to Details page without that query string, it goes to the Details page, and there's no data here. And I can use this button to go back, or, as I mentioned, you can use the hardware key to go back as well. So kind of for free, you get integration with the hardware back key. So let's go back. And now if I call the version that passed in the query string, we'll see here is some data. Here is the data that I passed from page 1 into page 2. So not a super complicated example, but this is just to let you know it's the same as Silverlight 3 navigation, and it's very similar to web navigation. So if you know how to do that, you know how to build a Windows Phone application. So let's do something a bit more interesting that isn't in Silverlight 3. What I'm going to do is add some orientation support. And if you saw Scott Guthrie's keynote yesterday, he very, very quickly demoed orientation support in the emulator. But you might remember when he clicked the rotate button on the emulator, the new screen just kind of snapped into place. And that's what you get for free in the Windows Phone applications, is you get free orientation support, but we don't do any animations for you. But we all know that Silverlight is brilliant at doing animations, so let's see how easy it is to add an animation to orientation change. So I'm going to go into my details page, and up here you'll see this property called supported orientations. Now, to make my app support portrait or landscape, I just type portrait or landscape, and that's essentially what Scott did. So now my app will work portrait or landscape. That's all I do, nothing else. But we want to show you the cool Silverlight orientation change animation, so I'm going to grab some XAML from the snippets here. And really all this is familiar stuff, nothing new here. There's a storyboard that animates a rotate transform. Nothing new here, no rocket science here, it's just a rotate transform. And then if I go into the code, let's just go down here at the bottom. I'm going to add a very simple piece of code. When the orientation change method gets called, which, funnily enough, gets called when the orientation changes, I'm going to do a kind of a reverse rotate, clockwise or counterclockwise, depending on what my new orientation is. So that's going to set me up to be in like the before rotate position. And then I'm just going to call that storyboard, and it's going to do the rotation for me. So that's all I need to do some really cool orientation changes animations. So let's run this in the emulator. Go to details page, and ready, switch. And there we see our cool orientation change animation. And I can go back and forward. So, thank you. So that's how easy it is to get orientation-aware animated applications on Windows Phone. So let's go now and add the app bar. You've seen in the demos, and Joe talked about the application bar, which is this common piece of UI that lives at the bottom of the page, and it's where you can put things like mini toolbar buttons and menu items. So let's go back again to our XAML. And again, I'm going to kind of cheat a little bit and just copy it all in the interest of time. I missed. And so here we have a bunch of XAML. There's long names: shell, application bar button, application bar icon button, etc. But the crux of it is we have a couple of buttons here, a couple of icon buttons, one called paint bucket, and that's going to be a paint bucket, one called opaque, and that's going to change some opacity for me, and then some menu items, red, green, blue, and yellow. And what they're going to do is they're going to change the value of the paint bucket, which I'm going to use to change the background color of my application. So I need to drop in a couple of assets here just for the icon buttons. Let's go into my content folder, grab these two little icons. And one thing to note is that I do need to set them to be a build action of content, not of resource. And that's because the application bar is drawn by the system, and so the system needs to be able to grab these things as if they were content, not as if they were resources inside my application. So now I've done that. Let me go into my code. And I'm just going to drag in I'm going to paste in some code to handle the event handlers on the app bar icons and on the menu items. So nothing rocket sciencey here either. I'm creating a solid color brush called background brush. When my menu gets clicked, I'm going to do a little bit of reflection magic to get the color with the same name as the menu item name. Mike also used some reflection magic in order to get some enumerations. I'm using it to get colors. And then I'm going to set the background brush to be that color. Then when the paint bucket gets clicked, I'm going to change the background of my application to be the color that was set by the menu. And when the opaque button gets clicked, I'm going to make the application bar transparent or opaque. So let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. And you notice here sometimes the the emulator forgets its skin. So let's bring it back here. Let's go to the details page, and you'll see here the little app bar popped up. And if I click here, I get a nice little menu. So let's say I want green. I click the paint bucket, my background goes green. I click the menu, I say I want it blue. I click the paint bucket, and my app goes blue. So very, very simple stuff. A couple of event handlers hook this stuff up. And if I rotate the screen, you'll notice, if you watch very carefully, the little icons actually animate as well. Let me try and rotate that around again. You can see the little paint bucket rotates. And this second button, this opaque button I have, is actually going to make the whole app bar transparent or opaque. So if I click it once, my application can now draw right down to the bottom of the screen. And you'll see that if I rotate, you'll see that in this case, I haven't set a margin, so my text actually draws underneath the app bar. But it still works, even though it's transparent. So I can set my background to be red and fill it. Or I can make my app bar opaque again, and my application automatically updates. So that's some integration with the application bar. Let's go back to the app and look at one more thing, and that is splash screen support. So my application right now, it boots pretty fast because it's kind of simple. But if my application was more complicated and had a lot of resources to load, it might take a while to start up. And so we have a super easy way for you to do splash screens in your application. If I go back to my content here, there is an image that looks like this. It says, "My awesome application," because it is indeed awesome. And it's just called splashscreenimage.jpg. I drag that into my application. And again, I want to set the content, so the build action to be content, not resource, so that the operating system can find it. And now I'm going to run this, and it may be too fast to see, but if you're lucky, you'll see my awesome app flash up, and it's gone. But so I think you got to see that for at least a frame. But let's do it one more time. There it is, and it's gone. So the emulator is really, really fast. It's kind of hard to verify your splash screen is working, but it does indeed work. So that's kind of a quick look at some of the navigation stuff we have in Windows Phone application, and also how you use some of the phone-specific features of pages, like orientation and application bar support. So now I'm going to switch back to the PowerPoints. And the next thing we're going to talk about is controls and theming. So as you've seen all these demos, and if you were here in Mike's demo, you saw him show the same code running on the browser and on the phone. What we've done is we've taken the Windows Phone design look and feel and added that to the default Silverlight controls. And sorry, this is auto-forwarding again, so I'm sorry if I get out of line with it. The UI that you've seen is very simple and very elegant. Now, we all know Silverlight can do super flashy things. It can do great media. It can do 3D perspectives. It can do animation and so on. But the UI on the Windows Phone is really simple and elegant, and we'll take a close look at that in a second. The next thing to notice is that we have oversized hit targets. And if you're at Mike Smuger's talk yesterday, he would have talked about minimum hit target size and things like that. And we'll also take a quick look at that in the design tools in a second. The key thing is these are all capacitive touch displays. There's no more stylus. So you really need to be thinking about capacitive touch, people using their fingers to touch your controls. The next thing is that there's a big use of transparency inside the templates. And we'll see this as well in an example of the button. And this is something that Joe mentioned in the keynote, which is we're all about content and not Chrome. And so in order for the content to show through in your application, the default controls actually use a lot of transparency, so that more of the content can show through and less of the Chrome. And then finally, if you didn't catch the talk that Chad and Michael gave yesterday, I recommend you look at it online because they go into a lot of detail about the motivation behind the design and how you can use design in your application. So theming is another part. Sorry, this is auto-forwarding. Theming is another big part of the controls we have. On the phone, we enable the user to pick a theme that they want to match the way they feel. So we have a dark and a light theme, so a black background with white text, which you've seen in most of the demos, or a white background with dark text, and I'll show you that in a minute. And each of those themes has several what we call accent colors. There's 4 on the device. There's red, orange, green, and blue. And we let the user pick the colors that they want to match their mood, whether it's how they're feeling today or just how they want their device to look all the time. And the built-in controls that we ship are automatically themed. We integrate with the operating system to automatically theme the controls. I'll talk about how we do that. And we also, of course, enable you to use these themes in your applications. So when you write your own controls or when you put your own content on the screen, it's also really easy for you to tap into the theming system so you actually match what the phone looks like, and you're not always black on white when you should be white on black. So with that, let's go ahead and look at a case study of the button. So I'm back in Visual Studio, and this time I'm going to focus on the designer a little bit. I'm going to make this button align left, just for the time being, so we can focus on it a bit more. And I'm going to zoom in. And I'm going to zoom in because I just want to show you some of the features that I was talking about with the button. So here's a standard Silverlight button, nothing special done to it, standard button with our themes. And you'll notice a couple of things. The first thing is that no rounded corners anymore. If you've been using Microsoft operating systems for a while, you know that every other release there's rounded corners, and the alternate release there's square corners. In Windows Phone we've gone with square corners. So no rounded corners here, it's just a very simple, very elegant design. You'll also notice that although this white rectangle shows where the user thinks the button is, the hit target is actually much larger. It actually extends here where you can see the gray border. That's actually where the control lives, and that's where we will recognize touch targets. Another thing that I mentioned was transparency. So if we go ahead and drag one more piece of content into this application, let's say jellyfish, and then we set the background of our stack panel to be the jellyfish, you'll notice that the content shows through. So this is all about less Chrome, more content. Now this is cool because in the current theme, I have the dark theme, dark backgrounds, light text. The white shows up really well. But I'm going to show you an issue you can get yourself into here and how to get out of it in a minute. But first of all, I want to talk about theming. So if we go back to app.xaml, and we scroll down a little bit to where I hid the code before, you'll see we have here a bunch of resources. And these are standard Silverlight resources. These are all for colors. And in this CTP release of the tools, these colors are baked into the project templates. And that's so that the designer will work correctly. But what happens at runtime is actually we will load these resources from the operating system. So here we see the background color is bound to a dark gray. But if the phone is running in the light theme, this will actually be white at runtime. And the same with the accent color. Here it's bound to blue, but at runtime, if I change my device to green, I'm going to have a green color here. Now, in order to see this at work, we basically just need to comment out these resources. They're here in the CTP so that the designer works correctly, but they're not actually needed at runtime. So if you do this, the design surface will start complaining that it can't find resources. But if I hit Control F5 now, switch back to the emulator, we'll see that I'm currently in the dark blue theme. But what I can do is if I exit the application, go across here to Settings. This is one of the only things that is actually in the emulator build is Settings, so you can change themes. I click on Themes, and I say I want the light theme. And we'll see everything changes to light. And instead of blue, let's say I want green. So let's go back and back. There's the back key at work. And let's run my demo app again. And now instantly you see my app is no longer dark background with blue hyperlinks. It's now a light background with green hyperlinks. And that's because of the default work we've done to make sure the controls match the device theme. And here's the problem I kind of hinted at before. When I go to my details page, now my button color is black, because that's the theme for foreground in the light theme. And it doesn't really show up so well with the jellyfish background. And so the thing here is, we want you to show content, we want content to come through in apps, but you have to be aware about how your application looks, both with different types of content, because if you let the user pick, they may pick a picture with lots of light colors, they may pick a picture with lots of dark colors, and you also don't know what theme the user is going to be using. But there's an easy fix for this. If we go back into the designer, go back to my details page, and look at the XAML. For the stack panel, if I just set the opacity, let's say to half, now I'll be able to see my buttons correctly against the background, because the colors of that image will be blended with the background color, which is white in this case, lightens the whole image, and now I can see my button. And then in terms of how you use theme resources in your applications themselves, let's take a look up here. At the very top of the screen, we'll actually see we're already using them in our page. So, for instance, we've set the foreground of the page to be static resource, standard Silverlight usage, and set it to phone foreground brush. And there's phone background brush, phone accent brush, phone border brush, phone disabled brush. There's all sorts of brushes you can use that map to the current theme. And so that's how you can actually make your application be theme aware. So that's a quick kind of run through of some of the nuances of controls and how you can use theming in controls and how you can also use theming in your app. So back to our PowerPoint. And on to the final section for today, which is connected services. And I'm going to talk about two. One is push notifications, and one is location. So push notifications, you've seen mentioned in the keynote. Charlie demoed it with the Major League Soccer app. And really, push notifications is a way for us to offload what traditionally would have been background processing on the device into the cloud. Right? You don't need to be using CPU cycles and memory and battery power on the device to do a lot of kind of processing that can really be offloaded to the cloud. So a push notification is a server-initiated communication that enables key background scenarios whilst balancing battery life and preserving user experience. And so this is what we mean when we talk about smart multitasking, is that we offload the multitasking to the server and let the user focus on the foreground application, give all the resources to the foreground application, and let you notify the user from the server when there's something that they need to worry about. And there's three types of push notifications that you can use in Windows Phone. The first one is a tile update. So imagine that you have an application that's getting photo feeds off Flickr or some other website. And currently your tile says there's 14 photos, and the last one was a picture of tulips. Funnily enough, it's on the Windows, there's a default Windows image, but hey, it's on Flickr. Something happens on the back end, a new photo gets posted, and through push notifications, you can update that tile to say, now there's 15 images, and now there's a picture of a koala there as well. So that's the first type of notification. The next is toast notifications. So imagine you have a weather application, and if the user is using the device, they can be looking at the weather application, checking weather, etc. But even if they're not in that application, say they're just at the start screen as this image shows, and the weather forecast changes, and the user has indicated they want to know about weather changes, you can send a toast to the device. Now, you know this is fake because it said it's sunny and 85 in Seattle, which is never true. But you can do these toasts that will appear no matter what application the user is in. And if the user clicks on that toast, we will launch your application, and then you get to do what you need to do when you're in the foreground. But to do these kind of things, you don't need to be running any code, right? You don't need to burn battery. You don't need to use CPU on the device. So we preserve the user experience, and we preserve the battery life. All the heavy lifting is done on the server. And so these two were about notifications when your application wasn't running. The next one is about notifications while your application is running. Now, anyone that's used, say, Exchange ActiveSync knows that you can get messages sent to your device when they hit the server. So you don't have to poll constantly, is there a new message? Is there a new message? Is there a new message? You just wait for the server to tell you when there's a new message. Well, you can do the same thing in your application using push notifications. Again, saving battery life because you don't need to be constantly polling the server. You just set up a push notification, wait for something to happen on the back end, and then when it does, the server will ping your app, and the app can say, oh, there's a new message from my cache, and display it for the user. So push notifications are useful both when you're not running and even when your application is running. And now I want to talk a little bit about how push notifications actually work. Like, how do you use them? What do they do? So let's start off with your application. And your application is running on the device. And the user says that they want to sign up for some notifications. So you open up what's called a push channel with the push client on the device. And the push client returns back to you a URI. And it's just standard web URI. It points to one of our live servers back in our data center. But that's a URI unique to your application, unique to the device. Uniquely identifies you. So then your application sends that URI to your back-end service using whatever mechanism you want. You can have your own custom authentication, your own custom protocol if you want. However you want to get it back to your application, if you've already got existing code, for example, you do it however you want. And then your service just sits there. It's got the URI, and it waits for time to pass. So tick-tock, tick-tock. Eventually, something interesting happens that the user cares about. Event happens. So what happens is your service takes that data that's interesting to the user and just posts it to that URI it got before. So there's no secret source, there's no special protocols, there's nothing magic happening. It's just HTTP post to the URI we gave you and an XML schema that says, here's the data. That's all you do. So if you have an existing application that uses kind of a webhooks model to talk to other services, great. Works on Windows Phone, super easy. So the push service takes the data that you gave it, looks at the URI, figures out, whoa, which device do I need to send it to, sends it up to the device, and then, of course, if your app is running, we give the data to the app. If you're sending a toast, we show a toast. And if you want to update the tile, we update the tile. So that's kind of the round trip of how push notifications work. You get a channel from the device, you send the channel URI to your server, the server sends data to that URI, and then we do the magic to make it pop up on the screen. So that said, let's take a look at some code, because this is actually much, much simpler than it sounds. So if we switch back to the laptop, I'm going to go ahead and add a new page to my application. Let's go add new item. I'm going to add a page. I'm just going to call it push.xaml. Push. So, oh, and you'll notice, remember I mentioned before, I commented out those resources so I could show you theming. If you see a white screen like this, it means you forgot to uncomment them. So I'm going to go back in here in app.xaml and uncomment them so that we can actually go back to having a visible design surface. So back to push.xaml, there we go. We can see what we're doing. Again, I'm just going to drag and drop in some XAML. No rocket science here. It's a stacked panel that has a button and 2 text blocks. The first text block is where I'm going to display the channel URI, which we get back from the service. And the second one is I'm going to display errors, because I'm not sure how good the networking is in here, and if there's an error, I just want to make sure that my app hasn't crashed. And if we look at the code for this, it's actually going to be really simple. I really wish I could write some of this code live, because it's not that difficult, but in the interest of time, I'm going to use these snippets and then just walk through them. So the first thing we do is we create an HTTP notification channel. And this is that channel I talked about between the device and the URI that you send to your service so that you can push data to it to get to us. So I create a channel, and then when the user clicks on the button, I want to open a channel. So I create a new HTTP notification channel, and I give it a name. I'm just going to call it demo app. And then similar model that you saw in Mike's talk, if you were here for some of his, like the accelerometer, similar model to location, which we'll see in a moment, is that these are all kind of callback event-based systems because they're all asynchronous. So I'm going to add an event handler for when the channel URI gets updated, when I get that URI back from the push client. And I'm also going to add an event handler for an exception occurred because, again, networking here is kind of flaky, so I don't know if it will work. And of course, then I'm going to open the channel and put that inside a try-catch block. Now, if an exception occurs, I'm just going to display that on the screen. And these come back on background threads. So with all things Silverlight, you need to dispatch to the UI thread. And when the channel URI gets updated, so when I get that URI from the push client, I'm going to update the channel URI text and put it on the screen. Now, what I'm not going to show today, but Istvan will go into tomorrow, is how easy it is to actually bind to a toast or to bind to a tile. If I was to say channel.bind, I don't know if you can see the text here, but there's two things here. One says bind to shell entry point, and that's another name for a tile. So this is how I would bind this channel to a tile update. The other one says bind to shell notification, and that's how you get a toast. So I'm not going to show these today. Istvan will show those tomorrow. I'm just going to show you the simple code to get the URI, and then hopefully, if everything is working, we will actually see the URI on the device. Oh, and I always forget to do this. Let me go back here. In my main page, I actually need to have a link to this page so I can get back to it. So in my main page, another hyperlink, just like the others. This is go to push page, and we're just going to go to push.xaml. Control F5, let it run up in the emulator. Now here you see kind of a half-themed, half-not-themed app. Because I uncommented out those themes inside the app.xaml, some of the controls, like the hyperlink button, picked up that green theme, but the page in the foreground did not. They picked up the hard-coded colors. So some things will be green, some things will be blue. That's OK. That's just because I left those resources in the app.xaml uncommented out. So I go to the push page. You'll see here the button is black because the theme says black, but it should be visible. If you can't see it, it just says open channel. And fingers crossed, depends on what the network's doing. If I click this, let's see what happens. Yes, we get back a URI. So here you see it's just an HTTP URI to something in the live data center. And there's a bunch of goo here, which is how we uniquely identify the device. But this is the thing that you send to your service, and then your service just posts data to that URI. I mean, it couldn't be simpler. So this is how push notifications work in Windows Phone. And now I'm going to switch to the final part of the services, which is location services. Oh, this is auto-forwarded through everything. OK, you've seen my amazing images now. So here we go. Location services. And you'll see the little blue cloud here saying no emulator support. The emulator does not support GPS, and it doesn't support location. But one of the things I will show you is I've kind of written a mock that pretends to be the location service. And I'm going to have that on my blog later, so you can use it in your apps to pretend as if you had location on the emulator, even though it doesn't ship with it. So what we have with location services on Windows Phone is a combination of smart software on the device and a back-end service that lets us balance the accuracy of the data that you need from a location service with the time and power it takes to get it. Because sometimes, let's say you're building like a Yelp application, you only really need to know what city am I in or what zip code am I in. But other times, if you're writing like a follow me app, you really want to know down to the meter where you are. And so there are different requirements based on the kind of application you're writing. And one of the really, really cool things about location is that it's the same API on Windows Phone and on Windows Desktop. So if you have a Windows 7 machine, it has location services built into it. And if you write code for .NET 4 or WPF, this is forwarding again, if you write code for WPF or .NET 4 on the desktop using location, you can take that same code and run it on the phone. So it's a great story for cross-application usage of APIs. So here's the image that you kind of saw a sneak picture of before. Here's my phone in the middle, and there are 3 ways that we can get location on the phone. The first one, which everybody knows about, is GPS, right? Satellites in the sky. And GPS is really, really good for getting high accuracy data. Right? You can get it down to a few meters. But GPS has a bunch of drawbacks. Firstly, it takes more power. Right? You spin up the GPS, your battery starts to drain. Another one is that it's not the fastest thing in the world. It can take some time to get a GPS fix, especially if you've moved a long way since you last got a fix. So you've got a fix, I got a fix in Seattle, I jump on the plane, I come to Las Vegas. It might take me a while to get a fix because I have to find all the satellites. And the other thing is there's no way GPS would work for me right now because I'm indoors. So GPS is good for high accuracy, but has a bunch of drawbacks. So the next thing is we can use cell tower triangulation. And cell tower has a different set of attributes. The accuracy isn't so good, maybe a few hundred meters, maybe a few kilometers in certain places. But it uses the cell radio, and the radio is typically already on, so it's not using any more power than using the phone by itself. And it's also very, very quick, because again, the radio is already on, you already know what towers you're associated with. But cell towers obviously isn't going to work if you're in the wilderness or you're on a cruise somewhere where there's no cell towers around. So it has drawbacks too. And then the third one that we have is Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi triangulation based on hotspot names. And Wi-Fi is kind of middle of the road. It can be more accurate than a cell tower, but it's not as accurate as GPS. It uses more power than the cell radio, but less power than GPS. It's faster than GPS, but not as fast as cell. And its accuracy and the usefulness kind of depends on how many hotspots there are and whether we have cloud source data to say whether or not where you are based on these Wi-Fi hotspots. So it's good in urban areas where there's lots of Wi-Fi points for us to get access to, but again, not very good in the wilderness or out in an ocean liner where there's no Wi-Fi hotspots. And so there's these 3 different ways of getting location, but we don't require you to know these different things and figure out, do I use GPS or cell or Wi-Fi? What happens is we have this combination of smart software on the device and a back-end service. So if you only need a low accuracy location, you don't need GPS, we can figure out what cell tower you're associated with, figure out any Wi-Fi hotspots, figure out if the phone already knows where that is, so it might have cached data from a previous lookup. If not, it can talk to our back-end service, and our back-end service can say, oh, I know other people have been here, and we've been crowdsourcing real GPS data from the people in this location, and we know exactly where you are. So the cloud, which is a free service, will actually help you to get accurate details without necessarily firing up the GPS, wasting battery, and taking more time. And another thing that location service will do is not just give you latitude and longitude, which is useful but kind of not useful. It will also do resolving of civic addresses. So you can get, from the location service, you can get a lat long. Here it's like 36 degrees minus 115 degrees, where we are today, approximately. You can take that, send it to the service, and it'll come back and say you're in Las Vegas. You're at the Mandalay Bay, you're in Nevada, United States, Las Vegas. So it does the heavy lifting as well of reverse encoding latitude and longitude to actual civic addresses that are actually useful to you, because you can then take that data, do web lookups on it or present that to the user. So I want to do a demo of this. We'll see how well it goes based on lack of networking and inability to run the device. But I'm going to do it on the emulator, and I'm going to use the mock I told you about. So here we are. I'm going to add a new page to my application. going to call it location. And again, in the interest of time, I'm going to drag and drop in some XAML. And again, there's nothing super special here. There's a button. I'm going to click on it to kick off the work on the location service. There's a text block where I'm going to put the status of the device, so it can be initializing or waiting for data or having data. A text block where I'm going to put the position, so the latitude and longitude. And then a text block where I'm going to put that reverse-coded address. And if I look at the code, again, I'm going to just insert this and then walk through it. What we're going to do here is we're going to take a geo-coordinate watcher, and that is the thing that you use to get geo-coordinates. And we're going to get a civic address resolver. This is a thing that resolves latitude and longitude into real civic addresses. Now, when the user clicks on the Get Location button, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new geolocation watcher. And here I'm going to say whether I want high accuracy, which means I really need to know where I am to like a few meters, and I'm willing to take the hit in time and battery to get a GPS lock. Or in this case, I'm just going to ask for low accuracy data because I know there's no GPS that's going to work in here. So I'm going to ask for low, which means I'll get it back faster, but it might not be as accurate. Then, similar pattern to what you've seen before, it's an event-based system. There's a status changed event, which will fire when the status of the device changes, from initializing to getting data, etc. And there's a position changed event, which will fire when I get a lock in the device, and also when I move around with the device. And then I'm going to start the geolocation, so kick off the location services. And then for resolving the addresses, I'm going to create a civic address resolver. And again, there is a synchronous version, but I'm going to use an asynchronous pattern. I'm going to hook into the resolve address completed event and do some work when I get information back. And so here's the interesting things that happen on events. First is status changed. Again, I'm just going to update the text block, nothing special. Dispatch to the UI thread, because this will come in on a background thread. When position changes, I'm going to do a couple of things. Again, dispatched to the UI thread, because it comes in on the background. If the position is unknown, so let's say I'd asked for high accuracy data, I was in the wilderness, but GPS didn't come back in time. It might say you've got an unknown position. So in that case, I'm just going to say position is unknown. If my position is not unknown, ergo it's known, I'm going to put my latitude, my longitude, and my horizontal accuracy into that second text block. And then I'm going to kick off an asynchronous address resolve operation, which will take that latitude and longitude and come back to me with a civic address. And then finally, when the address resolve completes, if the address was unknown, I'm going to say the address was unknown. If the address was not unknown, I'm going to put the address line 1 into that address text block. So the basic flow is, I start the device, I get a status change that says I'm waiting for data, I've got some data. I get a position change saying I know where I am, here's my latitude and longitude, and then I throw that over to the service to say, now tell me where that really is, because I don't understand latitude and longitude, and it gives me back an address. Now this is all coded against the actual assemblies and the actual types that the location service uses. But since I'm having trouble with the projector here and I can't show you the device that has the real location on it, what I'm going to do is show you that mock I talked to you about. So I'm going to comment out system-device.location and just say using MIX demo helpers. And I'm going to put this code in my blog so you can use it in your applications. And what this does is it has a fake version of location service. Exposes the same APIs, fires things on the background thread, simulates pausing between notification updates, etc. But it all does it with fake data. And I'm going to initialize it with some data for Las Vegas. I'm going to say Las Vegas data.setup. And so it's going to pretend it's in Las Vegas, and it's going to simulate me moving up the strip. So now, this time I remembered in my main page, I need to add a link to this new page. So I had another hyperlink. Go to location page. Location.xaml, Control F5. Now let's go to our location page. Make this a bit bigger. So now you see my three text boxes, status, position, and address. And watch as they all kind of update. And again, this is fake data, but it's simulating what the real location service would do. So if I click Get Location, it starts initializing, and it says I've got no data. But then it's going to get some data here. 36 degrees minus 115 degrees. And you can see I'm moving up the street. It resolved it to Mandalay Bay, and then I'm moving up to the Luxor, then the Excalibur, and then this is going to keep moving up the strip, and I think it stops at Caesar's Palace. So if we could have shown this on the real device, you would have seen this happening, and if I was in a car driving, you would have seen this happening. But this is exactly the same data you would get from the real location service. So that's how easy it is on Windows Phone to get location data from a GPS or from a cell tower, and to decode it into real user-visible content. Now, one thing, I was wondering why I was so ahead on time, and I realized that these auto-forwarding slides actually auto-forwarded through a whole section. I apologize, I do not know why it's doing this. So let me just go back through all of these crazy builds. In fact, it went through a whole ton of it missed all of this. I don't know what went wrong. So I was going to talk about the back button integration, but with this mess up, I don't know if I can do that now. Essentially, the back key you've seen on the device, it lets the user go back and forth between previously viewed screens. So you've seen me demo on the emulator going forward to a screen and then navigating back to the previous screen, going forward to a screen, back to a previous screen. And it can also go back across applications. So if I'm in application 1, then I hit start, and then I go to application 2, when I go back, I can actually go back across different applications. And the key thing is that it's not to be used for application-specific behavior. So if you're running a game, for example, and you think, hey, it'd be great if I used the back key as like my fire button in my game. So I'm controlling some guy with the accelerometer, and when I hit the back key, I want him to fire his gun. That's not a really good use of the back button because the user expects the back button to work in a particular way, and you're violating what they expect the back button to do. But every rule has its exception. So I'm going to show you very quickly what one of the exceptions is to this rule about apps should not really use the back button. And if I switch back to my laptop, and this one I'm going to go through super quickly to try and get back in the flow of things. If I'm on my details page again, details page. Whoa, zoom that out a bit. And I'm going to add a bit more XAML here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to simulate a confirmation dialog. So I'm going to drag this in. Essentially, I have a button called delete, and then I have a fake dialog that's going to pop up and say, are you sure you want to delete, yes or no? Let's make that invisible for now. And then I'm going to add a bit of code here. And this is going to do something pretty basic. When I click the delete button, it's going to open up that confirmation dialog. So the dialog's just going to appear, and the user sees yes or no. If I click yes, I'm going to close that confirmation dialog. And of course, in a real app, I would go ahead and delete stuff. If the user hits no, I'm just going to close the dialog. And here's where the back key override comes in. So there's a virtual method on back key press you can override. And what I'm going to do is, if the confirmation dialog is open, I'm going to close it, and then I'm going to cancel the back key and say, sorry, Windows shell, I've already handled the back key. Please don't go back to the previous screen. And so this is really like the main reason why you would want to handle the back key in your application, is if you have some pop-up UI, whether it's a context menu or a kind of a dialog like this, users will expect that the back key will dismiss it. And so if we run this application now, I can show you what happens. I'm sure you can all imagine what's going to happen. If I go to my details page, if I click the delete button, my sexy dialog pops up. Now, if I hit no, it goes away. But I can also hit the back key, and it goes away. I can hit delete, back key. And now, if it's not visible, if I hit the back key, I let the system do its default behavior, and it goes back between pages. So that's the default. That's really the one exception to the rule of please don't override the back key, which is if you have kind of modal or semi-modal UI, it's OK to dismiss that when the user hits the back key. Now, I'm sure this PowerPoint has auto-forwarded again through all of my slides. So let me go back. So that was the back button. So one of the other, and now I have to kind of rewind, because this is straight after we talked about application structure and the application bar and so on. One of the other differences between writing a Silverlight web app and writing a phone app is, of course, on the phone, a lot of things can happen. There's a lot of interruptions coming in. You have things like there's supposed to be a build here. OK, you have things like phone calls coming in and text messages coming in and the lock screen coming in. And all these things affect the way that your application runs. And you don't need to deal with these things on a normal web application. So how do we deal with them on the phone? So basically, your application lifetime is very similar to what a normal application would be. You start off not running, your application starts, it's in the running state, and then you exit. And the difference is that while you're running on the phone, two things can happen. One is that you can be obscured, and we'll talk about obscurity in the next slide. And the other is that you can be paused, and we'll talk about pausing in the slide after that. And these are the ways that you deal with constant interruptions that you have on the phone. So the first is when you get obscured. And the little call out here says not in the MIX build because we don't have all of this UI in the build. But imagine that your application is running, and then something happens. A phone call comes in, or there's a reminder popping up, or the battery low dialog comes. And so really the user can't see your application anymore because there's something in the way of it. What happens is we tell your app, hey, you've been obscured. Might want to do something about that. But we keep running. We don't do anything to stop your application or to take resources away from it. It just keeps running. Then after some time, that piece of UI will go away, like the user accepts the reminder or they dismiss the battery low. We give you an unobscured notification saying, OK, you're back. Everyone can see what you're doing again. And the idea being that, for example, if you're a game, when you get the obscured event, this would be a really good time to pause the game. Because we're saying, hey, there's a big reminder in front of the game. User probably can't see what they're doing, and they're going to die if you don't stop the game. So they're going to lose their game. Not a good experience. So when you get the obscured event, that's when you would do things like pause a game. But you do keep running. So if you have, say, background music you want to play or some background animations you want to play, you go ahead and do that because your app is still running. It's just that anything that requires user interaction should be paused because the user can't interact. And of course, the opposite, on unobscured, you might choose to resume that game, or at least give the user the option to resume that game. So they're the two things that happen during obscured and unobscured when Shell UI pops up. So the next thing is, what happens if I actually jump to another application? So say my application is running, and the user does something like they click the start button to run a second application. Or they accept that incoming call and now they're talking to somebody. Or a notification comes in and they click on that notification and now they're in another app. So in this case, what happens is we send you a pause event to say, hey, pause, stop what you're doing. And we do actually suspend your application in this case. So in the previous instance of, say, reminders and so on, your application keeps running. In the case of switching to a different application, your application does actually stop. And then, assuming the user comes back to your application, we will give you a resume event saying, hey, you're back running again, and now you're back in the running state. And one of the key things about this one is, wait for it, while you are suspended, your application might be killed. So you have to assume that when you go into the suspended state, so after you've been paused, you have to assume that your process is going to be killed. Now, we don't always kill processes. We do it if we need the resources being used by your application. So say someone is in your app, and then they switch to calculator. We will give you a pause event. We will suspend your app. The user uses the calculator. And calculator doesn't really use that much memory, so we don't need to free up the resources used by your app. The user exits calculator. They go back to your application. We resume you. You're right back where you started. But assume that instead of calculator, they ran the web browser. And then they ran email. And then they ran calendar. And then they ran a bunch of other stuff. Eventually, we're going to need the memory that your application is using. And that's when we will kill your process. And so the key thing here is to use pause and resume to make that as undisruptive to the user as possible. So in the pause state, what you do is save state for future use. So you remember where you are in your application. You get ready to be suspended. And this is really where the page system also helps, because if you build your application into these discrete pages and you make each page kind of stateless, it makes it really easy for you to pause your application, because there's nothing really to do. Each app knows what it needs from its query string that it was given, but it doesn't really need any other state saved. So it can actually be really easy to save state. And then when the resume event happens, you load that state back in again, and you're right back ready where you left off. And the whole point of this, and again, it's part of our smart multitasking, is that the user should never know what happened, right? We do this, we pause you, you write state out, we resume you, you load it back in again. So the user doesn't know that we killed your process, right? To them, they actually are switching between applications. They don't need to know the implementation detail that sometimes they're in memory and sometimes they're not. And if you're kind of freaking out saying, oh, wow, what about background processing? Well, I'm not covering it soon because we already covered that. And the other thing is that Istvan will be talking about this more tomorrow. So if you've got Istvan's architecture talk tomorrow, he'll talk in more detail about pause, resume, and switching between applications. And now I'm back to where it left me off before. So let me forward through all of this. And again, I really apologize for this auto-forwarding through the presentation. Well, there's a lot of builds in here. Almost there. OK, so key takeaways. These are the 3 things I mentioned at the start, and the 3 kind of things that if you take anything away from this other than don't let PowerPoint auto-forward, they are, 1, applications are built using pages. And if you structure your application in pages, you get easy navigation, you get integration with the back key, and it makes your life easier when you have to pause and resume your application, because your application is siloed into these little kind of buckets of functionality. The next one is that a UI in Windows Phone is really clean and simple. If you have a strong brand and you want to go ahead and make your buttons bright red and flash and do all that kind of stuff, that's great. Silverlight can do that. Please go ahead and do that. We're not saying you must have square, transparent, black and white buttons. We're not saying that. What we are saying is, if you want to look like the default applications and you don't have a good reason for having flashing red and green buttons, please stick with the default UI, because that will match what the user's expectation is, and it'll keep the user experience up. And then finally, the location service and the notification service that we have can really be used in your app to help build a better user experience. It can be location aware, and it can notify users of important updates even when your application isn't running. So some further information, there's my blog. As I mentioned, I will be uploading my fake location service and some of the other code from today. Developer.windowsphone.com, I'm sure. Anybody downloaded this stuff yet? A few of you. There's also live.visitmix.com, where you can watch recorded talks. You can watch this one again if you really want to. You could watch some of the other ones. Seema's performance talk is next, and it's in this room. Someone, I think the conference says it's in a different room, but it's actually in this room. So if you want to learn about performance, stay here. Istvan's talk tomorrow is another good thing. And anybody heard of Charles Petzold? Okay. He's writing a book on this stuff, so when that comes out, you should go buy that.
Download it free.
Oh, download it free, sorry. OK. So call to action. Firstly, install the tools. I didn't see many hands up, so hopefully you're all going to, when you get home, you're going to install the tools. You're going to start coding. And then you're going to give us a ton of feedback. So tell us what's good about this platform, tell us what's bad about this platform, and tell us what's really, really painful. What do we need to do to really enable you to get, make app development super simple for you? And then one final thing, there is an opportunity for you to participate in either a usability study or a focus group. So if you talk to Susan, who's standing over there, waving right now by that light over there, or you send her email, she can sign you up to be on one of these usability studies or on one of these focus groups. Please fill out the session evaluation forms. It helps us make the conference better. It helps us get better. And thank you all for staying here for part 2. Thank you. And of course, questions.
Is the mic on?
Yes, I can hear you on the mic.
Oh, can you hear? Okay. So one of the 3 main buttons is the search button. Is there app-specific uses for that search button, or should it always take you to Bing?
Yeah, the questions around the search button. Right now, there is no application integration with the search button, so it will take you to Bing.
Okay. Second question is, how much time is there between the pause notification and when your application is suspended? How does that work?
So question, do I need to repeat the question? Can people hear the question? Okay, so we're still tuning that. We haven't finalized the delta between pause and stop. I'll take one from the front and back, so front and back.
Victor Larsson from Avanade. I have 2 questions. First, a silly question.
No such thing.
Okay, so we have 4 main color themes. Is there an ability to customize? I know I have a few friends who'd like a pink color theme, for example.
So there's nothing, we're not saying anything else about themes right now. There's 4 on the emulator today. That's all we're saying right now.
Okay, second question. You talked about the location service. Is this for the US or can I access it in Sweden?
No, both location and push are worldwide. So
Okay.
wherever Windows phones will be sold, you'll be able to use those services.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. I'll take one from the back. So.
Hello. Most of the things you talked about today are mobile specific, yet the message was that we can use the same code base for both web, Silverlight, and web, mobile, and Xbox. How would all those API degrade on different devices?
Okay, so the story is really that you can share your code, share your knowledge, and our message is really not that you write once and run everywhere, but you write your core code, and then you optimize for each of the experiences. So on the desktop, for example, you optimize for a mouse and a keyboard and a big display. On the phone, you optimize for capacitive touch and accelerometer and stuff like that. So what we're really saying is your core logic and all the core services and stuff like that that isn't directly related to UI or input specifically, goes across the 3 screens. But when it comes to input in particular, and also some forms of output, it really is specific to the device, because you don't have a mouse on a phone, and you don't have an accelerometer on a desktop PC. So if you saw Sean's or Mike's talk, they had that same app running in the browser and in the emulator. All the core stuff just works. It's the stuff that's actually specific to the device that you do need to kind of rethink about and rewrite.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ferran Gallego from Code Factory.
Nice to meet you.
Will location services provide functionality about looking for points of interest by category, by distances?
I do not know about points of interest. That would be a good question to ask in the Commons. I believe the Bing team is there.
And the second question is about the same route creation from A to B.
There's no route creation in the APIs that I was showing. But you should ask the Bing team in the Commons.
Okay, thank you.
And